Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. My name is Colin Moriarty. Today I'm joined by a very special guest. His name is Adam Hinton. He's an education consultant. Actually, I have it written here, because you wrote in your own email, an education consultant specializing in innovation and technology integration. Oh, we have much to discuss. Adam, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And congratulations on your engagement to Micah. It's very exciting for you.
Thank you.
And I'm all for, I 100% agree with you on the open bar situation at weddings.
It's incredible, right? I'll clue everyone into this. I didn't end up using it. I was going to use it in the show last week, but it just ended up being too long and I didn't. Someone wrote in with, one of those humorous gut checks being like, my wife and I had a dry wedding and now we're like double and triple guessing that people have a horrible time and all of that. And I wanted to use it and be like, yes.
Yeah.
They did.
I think I categories, like I've been to a lot of friends' weddings over the last decade, and I kind of break them into two categories, which is it's the ones who had the open bar and the ones who they made us pay for drinks, and nobody has a good time at those weddings.
Yeah. No, cash bar. No, I'm totally sympathetic to different financial levels and all of that, but you have to do it. Yeah. Even if it's just bar and wine or beer and wine, like you got to do it. Oh my God. I'm so glad that that's a good way for us to get started, Adam. I'm feeling good about this now. All right, my friend. So you reached out, as many people do, to talk about something on the show. I love education and academia. I think a lot of people know that. I was going to be in that world before I ended up in video games, and I'm glad I came into the video game world. But I was on a PhD course at one point. I was about to go to my master's degree when I got to work at IGN, and I left that opportunity to TA and do all that kind of stuff. So that's definitely the big inflection point in my life, I think. And so I'm very much focused on how my world now and my world then kind of intersect with each other. And so when you wrote in and said, do you have all this experience teaching and consulting? I definitely wanted to talk to you, especially because I read, you sent me a video too. I did not watch that, but I read it again this morning. Looked at your slate. You have like a deck here on Google Docs. And I was like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of stuff here. So tell me why you wrote in and tell us a little bit about yourself and what we're going to discuss today, because it's really up to you.
Yeah, I wrote in, I guess a few months ago, you were sort of talking, you mentioned an anecdote on your show about your sister and she just can't get into video games. She can't see the value in them, things like that. And, I was thinking like, I spend a large part of my career thinking about games and how they can be used in educational environments and for learning. And I worked as a teacher for many years, and then I went into mentoring teachers, particularly with technology, but also things to do with engagement and innovation. And I think that there's so much value in it, and my journey has really been kind of almost similar to the relationship with you and your sisters, really trying to convince people of just how powerful games can be inside of learning environments. I mean, I started out with video games. I'm not like a gamer by nature as a child. My friends and we had Super Nintendos. I was never really attracted to it in the beginning because games, I think I'm roughly the same age as you. So I came out right I was kind of coming up, the Super Nintendo years, and everybody was playing like fighting games. It was Mortal Kombat and things like that. And that was
it was huge then. Neo Geo games, all that stuff. Yeah.
And there was obviously like side-scrolling platformers. I wasn't really competent with those, unfortunately. So I didn't understand that video games could have depth. And I was at the time I was reading like fantasy novels, and that was the medium that attracted me, like reading Lord of the Rings, like being just completely sucked into these worlds and spending 10, 20 hours with a fantasy book. And I couldn't find anything like that with movies. I couldn't find anything like that with even TV shows. There were just, most TV shows at the time were sort of like day-to-day things. Like every episode was just a new little mini story, nothing with a long arc. So, and
the fantasy stuff of that era was kind of bogus too. Like I loved like Xena and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
but
yeah.
it wasn't Conan, but it was something else that was on back to back with it.
It's like
Hercules.
Hercules. Yeah, yeah.
But that was like the best we could do. It's so funny that that's true. It's the same thing with Stargate and all of that, where it's like, this is just 20 years ago. It was like this. It's crazy. So I know exactly what you're saying.
No, and we're in this, like, if I was growing up today, I mean, there's so much, we're so rife with like these deep, engrossing stories. And
I would have been a high school dropout. Probably. I would have been so obsessed with this shit.
There's too much. So, but anyways, I think I was in grade 5 or 6, and I was in a Nintendo Power magazine. There was this ad for Final Fantasy 3, and I came across that game, and it just like completely changed my life. Like I picked it up. I think I got it for Christmas, that and Donkey Kong Country, and I jumped into Final Fantasy 3, or it's known as 6 now. And I remember being like, this is like the books I'm reading. This is like, there's a long game here. There's an overarching story. There's all these characters I have to keep track of. There's blurred lines between like the battles and the narrative. Like your characters will just start talking in the battles and things like that. And then the real thing that kind of like made me realize how powerful games could be was, and maybe I'll put a light spoiler out, but there's a part in the game when you kind of wake up on an island as Celeste, this character Celeste, and you're with like your sort of childhood mentor, father figure, and the game doesn't tell you anything. You're just sort of trying to figure out what's going on and what you're going to do from here. You're all alone, and this guy Sid is like, he's sick, and you have to feed him fish. And I was like doing everything I could to feed this guy. He was like the nicest character, and despite that, he died. And I couldn't believe it. And I was heartbroken. And then you watch this totally depressing scene where she's just falling apart and hopeless. I'm telling my friends about this, and they're like, no. Sid, he doesn't die. Like you feed him the fish and he's totally fine. And you can go back and visit him later. And I couldn't. So when I realized like, oh my gosh, this game in a kind of part of the story that is, optional, or there's a gameplay choice in there, I had this deep emotional response to it. And it wasn't the same experience as my friends. And I realized like, wow, this is way more powerful than like books or film can be. And so that stuck in my head for a little while. And I've always been since then sort of a lifelong like Final Fantasy fan. But then I went into teaching, and I went over to South Korea with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. And it was great because my class was like 5 kids. And in South Korea, their education system is really formal. It's like worksheet, test, math heavy, like it's drill and kill. And they do pretty well on a global scale, but there's just no joy in education, right? So I had this class of 5 kids, and I used to like start thinking about things like, is there a way that I can make these kids smile and not feel like they're just dead at the end of the day after doing? And so we started doing like some kind of play-based stuff. I started incorporating games, or we started playing chess, and then we would make stories up about our the chess characters as they were moving. And I just noticed like they were having fun with it. They were doing well. And that kind of stuck with me. So then when I came back to Canada to start my teaching career, there was a big initiative at that time. A lot of challenges with boys and learning. They were having trouble in schools. Boys were being reluctant writers. They were not as engaged. And so they were looking for like their solution was, well, let's hire male teachers and maybe give like a male influence to these boys, thinking that was the solution. And when I came in and I started doing research on like, well, what I wasn't one of those boys. I was really engaged. I loved writing. I loved school as a kid. So how do I hook them? And I kind of started realizing boys are into play. They're into competition. They're into mastery of things. And I looked around at everything that was going on in education at the time, and I realized we're doing all these things. Like we read books, we watch movies, we listen to music. Those are all components of education. But nobody is really incorporating anything to do with games or play, really. aside from like basic little kind of junk that some teachers do, like Heads Up, 7 Up, or they play this game called Kahoot, which is a quiz game. Like it's really peripheral. And I said, why aren't we using these things? Like, these kids are obsessed with games. They love play mechanics. So that was about 10 years ago. And my journey from then has been like, how can we leverage these great things that game designers are doing and kind of stir them into the classroom? So that's really kind of where I come from it all.
Yeah, that's interesting, because there's a lot of stuff there. I've been writing notes because, first of all, I love what you say about male teachers, just the kind of the assumption, because I remember in elementary school in the late 80s and early 90s, my elementary school was, I went to a big school district, and we only had one male teacher, Mr. Thomas, and everyone wanted him because he was like the only male teacher, and it just felt like it would be a different world. And I never had a male teacher until I think I was in high school, which is incredible.
Yeah. It's very low in elementary schools. Like it skews mostly female teachers.
Yeah. And I would imagine so. I mean, I think that's natural, but that's so interesting to hear you say that. And then this idea that there could be more to, I don't know, gamizing or whatever, making play a part of young education more than field day and gym and whatever stupid shit that you end up doing year after year and decade after decade. And I wanted to ask you, because this is the only time I ever really encountered outside of edutainment games in the classroom, and it was in elementary school, or I'm sorry, middle school. And I ask people about this once in a while, and people vaguely know what I'm talking about, but I can never identify exactly what it was. It was probably 1995, and it was a social studies game where you played as like a colonial empire, and you you had like teams. Each team had like boats. You like rolled and did all this stuff to move across an ocean to a new land and explore it. It was like really weird. And that was the only time. And you each had like a flag. You can make your own flag. And it was, I don't know if it would be cool to do this anymore. It was very colonial.
No, we'd have to stick away from colonial stuff now. Yeah, for sure.
But I don't know what the hell it was. It was like only that. And then it was like Voyage of the Mimi was the only other thing I encountered that was ever fun enough to remember. That was like more of a fun outside thing that made it more like outside of the classroom. And I don't know, other than that, I had a very standard, boring education. So it's cool that people are thinking of this with
you, right? The games stick with you. Like, and I run into a lot of my old students, and I always ask them, like, well, what do you remember from when I taught you? Like, what's the one thing that sticks out? Because they always tell me something I think I forget, but it's always some type of like play-based thing that we did. Like, they'll be like, remember when you like made all those questions on puzzle pieces, and we had to race around the room and put the puzzles together, and then that's how we answered our questions from our reading. Like, and I was like, yeah, I kind of remember that, but yeah, like they love the play stuff. Like that's what sticks out. It's not, no one remembers the quiz or the test or the work, unless it was a huge punishing experience. They remember that, but not fondly.
Yeah, the closest we ever got to anything competitive was in elementary school. You had like the stars on the chart. When you did something, you had to want the stars to go really long and kind of own your classmates. Just little things like that. And you're right; those are the memorable pieces. But let me ask you this from a kind of a skeptical point of view, and we'll get into it. You were talking about South Korean education. And of course, Japan is another place, and a lot of Asian culture is more upper class Asian. No, I shouldn't say upper class. That's not really true. Not third world Asian countries that have the money to spend on education, they do pretty well. Yeah. And these are very strict, much more rigorous environments. I learned a little bit about it playing Persona 4, and I was like, is it really kind of like this, like crazy, like all year? And then I started reading about it. I was like, oh my God, it's actually very interesting. 6 days a week, all the rest, but it works. So why wouldn't we go in the other direction, I guess is what I'm saying. Why wouldn't we go in the direction of saying, like, let's be very serious about this? Because obviously these people in these societies are doing better than our children, as opposed to engaging them in a way that might be fun but different. And I ask only in light of a story I just read, I think in the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago, about Oakland in California, I don't know if you saw this, about their reading initiative, and how they had a equity-based reading initiative where now only 18% of their students are like literate. And
Yeah.
which is insane. So 1 in 5. And I'm not saying that that's what you're doing, but what they're doing is another off the beaten path idea, as opposed to saying like, let's fucking just teach kids how to read like we did for time immemorial.
Yeah.
So what is your argument against, why wouldn't we want to replicate the really hardcore shit?
Yeah, like, and I think there was a time in our history, like in North America, where education was closer to that. But we, we've moved away from it. Like probably, after World War II, school has been just a wild experiment, and we don't have the cultural value about education that they have in South Korea. Like and Japan as well. When I was in South Korea, I mean, the parents deeply, deeply value school, and they deeply respect the teacher. And we would have like teacher day, and I have in here in my office like a jade lion that one of the parents gave me, and I would get like $300 gift certificates to clothing stores, and it was just like, and I would stand up and tell them about like what I was going to do in that term, and they would like be so they would just be so deferential to me. Like they're really passionate. In South Korea, like even the school I taught at, my students would go to public school all day. Then they would come to me, and I was like their secondary English school. It's called a Hagwon. And then after that, they would go to tutoring. Like it's just right. And it's, in Seoul and Japan, I mean, it's so competitive. Like everything is so competitive. And there really is a cultural, it's a lot of people have described it as, it's almost like a hive mind type thinking there, closer to, so it works there because their culture has been constantly shaped around that. And we just don't have that. In North America, we're much more about freedom. We're much more about doing what we want, right? There's other models, though, that, I mean, often when you hear about like high success models of education, you hear about South Korea, you hear about Japan, you hear about China. But the other one that's always at the top is Finland. And the Finnish education model is really like, they have like 4 or 5 hour school days. They have 1 hour lunch breaks. The teachers are paid the equivalent to doctors. They're highly respected. They're all intermingled from grades primary to 3. They're not like in a grade class. And then it's a lot of hands-on play projects. Like it just looks nothing like what you would see in a public school in North America. And they score highest on the like the international PISA tests, and there's no homework, there's no tests. Like it's phenomenal. So you can kind of have both ways. And I guess I would argue our culture is probably closer to Finnish mindsets than in North America than it would be to Japan or South Korea or China. So
yeah, that makes sense to me. In your deck, you talk about gamification. So let's get into this.
Yeah.
You define it as the use of game elements and game thinking in non-game environments to increase target behavior and engagement. So this is what we're discussing writ large. But talk to me about where this notion even comes from of gamifying, because I often talk about the metagame and a lot of different things, and I think we're talking about the same thing. Mm-hmm. I remember when Foursquare came out, the app, and that was really strange. Like I really liked it. A lot of people really liked it for a while, and it was meaningless. It was totally meaningless, and it was a thing you did outside to just check in. If people that don't know, Foursquare was an app where you would, every store and place you went to was on it, and you would check in when you went there on your app, and then people would become like the mayor of this place, and it was like you would get like little accolades and awards, and it really was playing with your mind in that way. And it was the first time outside of trophies and achievements where I realized, wow, I'm being kind of played, but I'm enjoying it. And I don't really know what I'm getting out of it, but I remember it. So talk to me a little bit about gamification and where it comes from and what our conception of it is.
Yeah, I think, I think that, companies have certainly really realized that there's a lot of benefits to adding game-like elements to things. I think our brains just crave play. And I look around at, you look at young children, you have no problem coaxing them to play. You send them outside for recess at school. They play, they form their own little games, things like that. And then you look at adults too. And I think about, I'm a big football fan. My friends and I we have a fantasy football league. I also do daily fantasy. I play in a poker league. Like I'm constantly and all my friends are constantly seeking like these playful environments. We love it. Our whole world is made up of sports fans and of gamified experiences, and companies too. They've started to look at this like, well, famously there's this extremely rare like Nintendo DS cartridge that they used in Japan, and to train their workers, they gave them a DS game on how to be at McDonald's. They gave Nintendo made a video game for McDonald's to train their workers on how to make like Big Macs and how to sanitize and things like that. I think there's only like 1 or 2 copies left in existence.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And other companies use this constantly too. There's all kinds of like, incentives or rewards programs or things like that. And then other things like there's another example that I've used before in Sweden. There was this one street, and it was like the street where the most speeding tickets were given out in this city. So they created a gamified lottery, and basically these cameras would track every single driver, and anybody who was not speeding that month was automatically entered into a lottery. And then one person was drawn, and then all the money from speeding tickets would be given to the winner. And I mean, the result was, a change in social behavior, and speeding went down. But people like to play things, right? That's what our brains. So I was looking at all these things. I'm like, okay, young children play, adults love different forms of play. Why is there this area where kids ages 6 to 18 spend a huge chunk of their life that just has no really systematized forms of play inside of it? Like, why are we not using this for school, right? And my big debate one day when I was in a staff room, I was saying like, well, what's the best teacher in the world? And my colleagues were like throwing stuff out, and I said, I think the best teacher in the world is Fortnite. And for the record, I detest Fortnite, but I do think I just like, as an educator, it's this thing that kids love to learn about. There's no instruction manual. They are driven to go back to it again and again. They're completely engrossed in it. They want to be proficient in it. They're talking about it. They're problem solving with it. And I was saying, like, why don't we have anything like this in the classroom? Like, why aren't we borrowing from these? So again, that's this other component. Like, when we want to talk about gamification in the classroom, we have to borrow from game designers because they're good teachers. Like, games are excellent teachers, and it doesn't matter if it's a JRPG, it doesn't matter if it's Fortnite. They all have elements of them that you can use. So I guess, in a sense where, your job is you analyze games, you analyze the industry from that perspective. You're looking at what are the big moves happening in the industry. I analyze it from a pedagogical perspective. So what is happening in the world of games and games media, and how can we take it and incorporate it into a teaching environment, or how can we use this? And that's where sort of my research started a few years ago. And what I did when I started to become a consultant and mentor was to break down different components of game design, and then work with teachers on looking at like, what are these different elements, and how can we slowly like experiment with stirring them into your classroom? And that's really where that research and the training began.
I wonder, because you had brought up competition, which especially for male students, I guess would be more heightened. What would you say to the argument that the competition is already central to it, and that the game is getting good grades? Like, everyone plays the same game. Yeah. And maybe the more East Asian society, where you post your grades and everyone's kind of competing, and there's places in your class that might be more like them than like the Western or Scandinavian countries, I guess we should say, that we were talking about earlier. But is that not a central form of gamification itself? Just competing at what's before you. Everyone is given the same book. Everyone is given the same test. Everyone is given the same quiz. And then you see how well you do on it. So what about that? I mean, is that something that it itself can be heightened, or does that kind of conflict with the entire idea of gamification, in the sense that I also feel like it's antithetical to modernity, where people don't seem to like that kind of competition anymore. Mm-hmm. People don't like the kind of shaming the person at the top, the person with the kid with the least stars or the fewest stars, whatever the case might be. So what about that? What about just grades
Yeah.
and the competition of that.
There's certainly a case to be made for since the inception of public schooling and formalized, education systems, that's a type of game. I mean, when schools started, they were very much optional, right? You could go to school, or you could stay like at your family's farm and you could work on the farm. And then once you go to school, you are engaging in a game, right? And the game is attendance, the game is marks, the game is proficiency, and certainly the game is going up against your fellow classmates and doing better than them or debating them. Those can be, you could say those are basic game elements. The problem is that in a lot of school systems, we haven't really gone beyond that, right? We haven't really expanded beyond that and added new elements. It would be like if all of our games were still just like Pong, right? And we never added anything new to it. It would never created anything new from it. As far as the competition piece is, like, yeah, there's a delicacy to it, because when you're making game experiences in the classroom, you don't want anybody to feel shame, and you don't want anybody to feel like they're, a million points behind or things like that, right? So you have to, like, I always talk about creating like layers. Certainly there's going to be competitions where there's one winner and some losers. Often competitions, I would try to make them team based, so that when one team loses and every other team, or one team wins and every other team loses, it softens it a little bit. But there's also ways to create things that everybody can kind of celebrate. So and you might be interested in this, like one of the best little mechanics I put in is I created a trophy system for my classroom. And
nice.
So what we did is I had file cards, like sort of bronze colored file cards, silver colored file cards, gold colored file cards, and then like a platinum one that I put like diamonds on. And that was meant to be experiences that we're all going through for trophies. And so it might be, the first trophy might be everybody in class completed their homework on the same day, or we all finished the first chapter of our read aloud novel, right? And they would be sort of like staggered so that you can just get all the trophies in the first term of school.
Right.
And then every, like, I would have like rewards. So for 6 bronze trophies, we would have like a double recess, or for 12 bronze trophies, we'd get to do like our first seating change. Right. And so everybody's kind of celebrating together. Everybody's kind of competing together. They're crossing finish lines together. And then the platinum was like, it was always designed so you could only get it at the end of the year, but it was like, we'd have this party celebration day. Right. And those are the kinds of things, when you have those mechanics happening at the same time as sort of some of the individual competitions, it just makes everybody sort of feel they're getting something out of it.
Right.
So yeah, but there is a delicacy to it.
Sure. Of course. Especially with children. I mean, that makes sense to me. I love what you brought up. It just tickled something deep in my mind. Seating changes. That was exciting, wasn't it? Or when you got older, you got to change lab partners and stuff in chemistry and whatever. I used to love that kind of stuff.
And this is controversial. I always get kind of flack for this, but when I haven't had a classroom about 5 years now, but in my classroom, after our first seating change, I would change the seats every day. And it was like, no one's ever getting cozy here. You got to learn to work with different people. You got to, right. And they had names like on their seats. So it was never like chaos. And I treated it like a workout in the morning, like ramming the desks in different positions and stuff. But yeah, the seating change was a big moment, right? It's like I'm finally in a different part.
It's cool. Yeah. That just tickled something. It's been so long since I've been in school. It's almost like another life. Yeah. So what kind of feedback do you get about this from other teachers? Or is there a lot of, I expect that there's a lot of skepticism. And I say that because I'm sure there are a lot of people that are open-minded more and more, but knowing people in my own life, like you said, my own sister and just others. And I also come from just a family of teachers, pretty traditional bunch, do what they do. And I don't know. I feel like if you do things for decades, like you said, we get stuck in these ruts and we don't add anything. So what kind of feedback are you getting to try to gamify these classrooms? Are people enthusiastic or are they hesitant?
Yeah, it's a range, right? Because it's like, once we walk out of this little bubble, we kind of walk into a world that it just doesn't have the same reaction to video games as it does to, say, film or TV shows. Like, I hear people talking about the best TV show all the time. I rarely hear people, going on and on about the game that they're playing outside of like my friends who are gamers or colleagues. But yeah, it's difficult, but I can sell it because right now, especially after sort of trying to come out of a pandemic, the word on everybody's mind is engagement. And across North America, attendance rates in schools are down, right? It's engagement is down, right? We're coming out of a strange time for kids where they've been sort of, this is not an ideal environment for them. So teachers are looking for ways to kind of hook kids or have fun. If you're a gamer, you can understand and digest these things easily, and it's fun. Like if I talk about like different components you can add to your classroom, like when I talk to gamer teachers, like about, you can create an economy, or you can make Easter eggs in your classroom, or let's make a collaborative puzzle. They're into it, right? I have to break it down into smaller components for teachers who are not, game converts, and show them how it can be used. And often I'll go in and model this for a teacher and show them. And I have little tricks I use that you can hook a class in like 4 or 5 minutes. Like there's not a lot of arm twisting to get kids to want to do something playfully. It's pretty easy, and they love anything that doesn't feel like school. Right. So that's easy. So depending on the person, I have to sell it in different chunks, basically. So yeah, sometimes I get some, like if somebody's just they have no interest in that world or no knowledge of game systems, and their biggest reference is like Super Mario Brothers on Nintendo. We're going to start small with them, right? But somebody who's a gamer, or who's into play-based things, or who's done some more engaging stuff, they're all for it. And I've done like in my like research phase of this, I worked with probably 50 teachers, and the results we got back, like we surveyed the students and we surveyed them, like 100% of the teachers responded that they had increased engagement, and like 98% of the students said that they love those environments. So the research kind of speaks for it right now. So yeah. I was going through your stuff, and I don't know where it was, on what slide it was, but yeah, you had said that there was like a 100% positive reaction to one of these things, which is amazing. Yeah. So from teachers, which I thought was really cool. So give me some specific examples here, because you brought up Fortnite, which I think is interesting, and you talk about how this is a great venue for education. Is that? I mean, it's not by design. Obviously, they don't give a shit about education at Epic. They want you to spend money, but is it just that the game is ubiquitous that it makes it that way? Because couldn't you also say the same thing about Grand Theft Auto or something like that as well? Or is it more than that with Fortnite? No, Fortnite seemed to be the starting piece for discussion, because it's just like when it first sort of hit big, you just couldn't escape it in the classroom. It's all the kids were talking about. It's all I used to have to like get kids to turn off YouTube because they were watching, Fortnite videos, that we are suddenly, those, did you ever used to have those like book order forms, like Scholastic book order forms? Oh yeah, of course. Oh yeah. They started to be like Fortnite books, like the unofficial Fortnite strategy guide. So it was really a talking piece. I think you could take any video game and have a conversation about it and use it. The other big one is Minecraft, and actually right. that one is actually much more. It really is an educational piece. Before Mojang was bought by Microsoft, there was actually a group of teachers that they founded Minecraft EDU, which still exists, but it's under Microsoft now. And we have licenses in my province in Canada where all of our students have a Minecraft EDU account. But I had purchased a Minecraft EDU license for my school, and we did things like we explored ancient Egypt to scale. We looked at the inside of a cell. We built scenes from the novels we were reading. Like, that was a much easier sell as on an educational level, because it's really just it's an artistic palette tool that you can build narratives or build representations in. But yeah, the Fortnite thing was just it's so zeitgeisty that that was the talking point I used to come at it with.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it seems silly. I mean, to be like, well, why wouldn't you teach kids about Grand Theft Auto? I mean, it's called Grand Theft Auto. But the point is just the ubiquity of it, because Fortnite is about killing people. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that it's necessarily any different. I was just curious from my mind's eye, like, is there a specific notion of that game, or is it really just more of its ubiquitous platform? And I think I totally understand. You want to go where people are. Mm-hmm. As opposed to trying to force them where you want them to be necessarily, at least in my experience. I was thinking about Minecraft because, and I wrote that in my notes before you even brought it up. I wanted to bring it up because I feel like there's been some sort of, I don't know what it is about Minecraft. You had brought up the EDU stuff that they've been doing, but there's just something about it that reminds me a lot of how parents feel about Lego, mm-hmm. where it feels innocuous. It's like an innocuous way to have fun, but both interface with that fun, and it's for some reason not very toxic for you. Are there any other games that are of a similar ilk that teachers and students and parents look towards today? Because again, I'm so out of this. Yeah. No one in my life talks about Fortnite. I mean, it's not, I'm not hearing about it. So I need you to tell me what these young people are playing. Yeah.
Oh, you're so lucky that you're not everywhere you walk and someone's not talking about Fortnite. It's like you walk through the hallway of a school and it's just, you're hearing about V-Bucks everywhere. It was like the number one Christmas gift one year, and all the kids were talking about how much V-Bucks they got.
It's so crazy. I mean, I have nephews and nieces, but I've turned them into hardcore nerd gamers. So,
that's great. Yeah,
thankfully they talk about other games.
Yes. Yeah, and I have two boys, and my own kids there's no Fortnite in our house. It's like we're my oldest is 10, and I'm just chomping at the bit until he's old enough to like play BioShock. Like I'm working him in there, but
excellent.
I mean, there's other game. The other one that has sort of an education side platform to it is Roblox, which
right. Of course.
I find that's almost like that. It's kind of like that middle zone between Fortnite and Minecraft. It's online, and there's a myriad of like mini games internally that kids can play, and there's killing. But with both Minecraft and Roblox, there's educational side platforms where you can code for them, or you can build worlds or generate worlds. So that's one. The other one that's really big, and this doesn't come from a gaming IP per se, but MIT has this program called Scratch, and it's a free coding program, and we call it snap coding. And I work with a lot of students on it, where you can design your own games pretty quickly and pretty easily using this program called Scratch. And you can import or use avatars and sprites from other games. And they're pretty simple stuff, but you can create logic-based games, mazes, platformers, things like that. And there's really nice like built-in tutorials that you just follow things step by step. And I've used it with kids from grades 2 and 3 all the way up to grade 12. So those are the core. I'm not really familiar with any other like games that you can use, but some of the other work I've done is like let's take a game that exists and let's see how we can talk about it or use it in a traditional learning environment. So like one of the things I used to do is I used to bring in like my old Nintendo and hook up and put in the original Final Fantasy, and we would be doing like it was like a cinematography unit study. Like what are that, right? And I was saying like, this is a game where this is the first time that one of the first times that a game was not just about play, but it was also supposed to be a cinematic experience. And we'd play like the first 10, 15 minutes of it where you sort of get that big like Final Fantasy splash screen, and we would do the first quest and you get little snippets of story. And then you get to that, like the scene where like the famous Final Fantasy song plays and it tells you kind of like this little story about the 4 warriors of light. And I'd be like, so let's talk about the cinematic elements here. So we'd use that. Or the other project I'm working on right now is with a colleague. Do you know the game Crosscode? Have you heard of Crosscode?
Yeah, the role-playing game.
Yeah. So we're my colleague and I are kind of gushing over that right now. And what he wants to do is he's going to bring it in on his computer and put it on his projector, and just with some students play through the first like the tutorial and the opening bit, and he wants to look at math concepts because everything in that game is like a puzzle.
It's a puzzle, yeah. That's why I played it for 10 minutes and I'm like, oh no, I can't do this.
Oh yeah, no, and it's man, it is a maximalist hardcore puzzle game. Like every screen is a puzzles on puzzles. It's crazy. But what he wants to do is take that opening tutorial and look at things like angles and problem solving, things like that. And that's his math side of it. And then for his literacy side of it, we're going to look at like, we're bringing in some old like Nintendo Powers with the little mini strategy guides.
Oh, I loved those.
And the kids are going to make strategy guides for the first, like they're going to be their September project, is make a strategy guide on how to solve like the tutorial level of a game. And so like, I
love that. That's awesome.
Just stirring in the like, and that to me is way more exciting than saying, oh, we're going to read, a Shakespeare play. And then, you're going to write about, the emotions that you think were going on here, or we're going to, study angles on a piece of paper and you're going to use your protractor and then you're going to fill it out on a test or a quiz. Like, you can do those things. You can have worksheets, you can have tests and quizzes. I don't personally like any of those things and never use them in teaching, but your kids are going to have like all learning, like real learning happens through experience, right? So you're like, you're a strategy guide writer, right? That's
how I got into the industry.
Yeah. Did you really learn about writing strategy guides from just reading them, or was the real learning when you started writing them?
Yeah, you have to write them to really know what to do. Yeah, that's how I feel about chess. That's why I always tell people when I play chess, I love chess. And you brought it up earlier. It's like you have to lose badly to be able to play, and it turns people off. But it's like you can't just come in and have a fucking fun game of chess. It's not the way it works. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to give kids, and they're not going to go out in the world for the most part and do tests and quizzes and worksheets for their life. They're going to be working with other people. They're going to be solving problems on their own. They're going to be like, they have to like experience different things. And like, what's a better way than doing it through like playful environments, or what's a better way than doing it through adding some of these mechanics that, they know, like in our stats in Canada, I think it's like most kids all play video games now. They have experience. Like it used to be like a mostly sort of a boy centric thing, but female students are really into gaming now too. And it's not everyone's cup of tea. And I would never advocate for like games all the time, every single day. Like, you got to give people a little bit of a breather and not think that everything is like some, collaborative competition or individual competition, but why not stir those in more and more often? Like, it's just, we love that stuff. We crave that stuff. So put it in there.
Let me ask you this. I don't know if you have any insight into this, but since we are similar age, I would assume you might. Is edutainment still a viable thing? Is that like, we grew up with Apple IIs and Macs full of games from companies like MECC. And I was actually talking about them recently. For people that don't know, MECC was the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium. And that was a ubiquitous company. If you were Gen X or early millennial in school, that's Oregon Trail, Numbers Munchers, all that kind of stuff. And that was what we always, it was the cross section of computer learning and computer education at an early time of personal computers, and then these very simple games. And that was kind of like our time in the computer lab and our intersection of education and games. Is that still a thing? Because it feels like those games don't, when I talk, not that I'm talking to young people all the time, but my nephews and nieces, like I don't ever hear them talking about those games, but those like Number Munchers, whatever it was, a letter or word munchers, and Oregon Trail and Amazon Trail, and all these games were like ubiquitous parts of our Carmen Sandiego, parts of our lives from this one company. And I don't know if it's like a relevant part of education anymore.
No, certainly not that company, but I bet if you were to ask your nieces and nephews,
they're defunct, by the way. So definitely not.
Yeah. If you were to ask about like cool math games, like there's all kinds of these online, some of them used to be made in Flash, but there's all kinds of these online like companies that make these learning games. There's one I used to play with my students called Z-Type, where you're like a spaceship and you're shooting like aliens, but they're actually just words. You have to type the words out.
That's cool. Yeah. I love that kind of stuff. That's good stuff.
But what kids gravitate to, like when you go on the cool, like this cool math games website is, my son like when he was doing online learning from COVID, he wasn't going on and doing the math games. He was playing this game called what was it? The name escapes me, but basically it was like Call of Duty, but you were all eggs and you're just running around. It's a shooter, but you're eggs, and that was the game they all played. Yeah.
Shell Shockers.
Shell Shockers. That's it. Yeah. And that's all the kids played. So yeah, those aren't things. The one game that it's really interesting. It's Canadian and it uses Canadian curriculum. It's called Prodigy Math. And what you do, you sign your class up and they all have like a little login code, and it's like an online MMO, but it's like 2D sprites. And it's very similar to Pokemon, and you get into turn-based battles, but you're answering math questions. And it's got like some machine learning to it. So it will slowly learn like how quickly you answer questions or solve problems. And it will like increase the difficulty of the math questions. And it's aligned with Canadian curriculum. So it uses like actual questions from Ontario or Canadian curriculums. And kids love it. Like they can dress their avatar up and they can capture monsters and things like that. That would be like a modern edutainment game, Prodigy Math. And there's some insidious bits to it too. Like what some parents have found is you can sign your class up for free. You can do basically everything for free, but there's a subscription model that you can get for your kids. And that gives you like additional chests to get additional upgrades for your character and additional, it's those same things you find in free games, like cosmetic updates. Right. And so, I always warn about those insidious bits that are like, getting us to pay money for things that don't really matter. Right. Like what really matters is, okay, are they practicing and applying mathematical concepts, through play? Well, if that's the case, then yeah, the Prodigy is great. But are they just spending time, grinding and then, using a calculator or looking up answers so that they can get, gemstones to power up their dragon's hat? Yeah. I don't know. You always have to like, redirect to the educational value side of it.
I have this, I have a couple more questions for you before we go. And one of them is, I'm a prodigious reader. I was, especially when I was younger, not so much anymore. And I'm a writer, and I've kind of fantasized about this idea of just replacing your traditional English and literature classes with video games. Not at the earliest moment, but maybe later on or more advanced classes, wherein instead of sitting and reading a classic piece of literature, which is awesome, you can get a really robust story, as we know, out of a game. Bigger, and you talked about Final Fantasy VI in your experience. I mean, I love that game too. That game is near and dear to my heart. Mm-hmm. And it's for a similar thing because it has a literary quality. Do you think games could ever full on replace the notion of any of the ways we learn? So obviously we're always going to have to take some math tests, for instance, to prove our knowledge of the fundamentals and all of these things. But could a year-long 12th grade honors class just be 5 role-playing games that you have to play?
Yeah.
And talk about? And would that be as valuable, and would people be open to that?
Absolutely. So this is the process I'm in right now and I found this on Reddit, and there was this teacher on Reddit, and he applied for a grant, and he showed a picture of his grant. He bought like 20 Switches and 10 Xboxes, and he couldn't get any PS5s. And he's using this as a games as literature unit of study. And so I've kind of been looking at that and saying like, well, I want to do the same thing. And so my goal is to apply for a grant to have sort of a roaming travel kit of Switches and Xboxes, maybe some consoles. And then I would like to specifically buy narrative games, right? So JRPGs are great for that. Visual novels are great for that. And sort of design a unit of study or a large inquiry unit of study around games as literature and looking at literary elements. So yeah, absolutely. And why not? Books are great. And I think that you always are going to have a place for reading and writing. Right. But again, looking at games through that experience it's far more powerful. It's very engaging. And I think the thing right now is people just don't understand how really great narrative can be in games. We know it can be great for TV shows. We know it can be great for film, right? But I just don't think games are there in terms of cultural respect yet for their power of narrative, and sometimes you just want to shake somebody and say and explain to them just how meaningful, a scene from a Final Fantasy or from BioShock could be to a player, and how much, there's games I've played. I'm sure you've you've played games even without writing, like when I played Journey and I put the controller down after playing that, I just laid down and had to come back to earth. It just shook me as a narrative without words.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was really upset after I played it, and I couldn't really tell you why either, which is what was so interesting about it.
No, I couldn't either. It's just I felt something there, and I've never really done that after watching a movie. I felt things, but that the level of games is you're moving it, you're making, right? If I go back to the Celeste Final Fantasy VI example, I was doing my best to take care of that guy, and he died on me, and I was totally engaged, tactically with that experience, right? You're not tactically engaged with a movie or a book. You're just turning the pages, and whatever the author wants to happen happens. Right? With games, there's so much more power in that. So that, to me, they're a much more powerful form of literature. So
I totally agree. And I in my mind's eye, because I was an above average student, I guess, in secondary school, honors and AP, but it was like you were excited to be in those classes, and they were more challenging, and you knew that some of them counted for college credit and they were preparing you for the future, but you were never really falling all over yourself to get into a class in high school like I was in college. And I could just imagine how cool that would be for your upper end students that do well to be like, you can graduate before you graduate, but graduate towards these classes that will make your last couple of years really robust and interesting. And a game a quarter, and just focus on it. And not only from a literary point of view, although that's what's most natural to me and maybe you, but from all sorts, just from a design perspective, an art class all about 2D art, or a design class all about intention behind placement and monster closets and all these things, and a programming class that shows how these games were cleaned up over time. There's just so many ways, like you said, to engage children. It's really exciting. I think it's cool that all this is possible, because this wasn't happening when I was a kid. And in my mind, it's interesting you were talking about the hardware, because I totally wasn't thinking about that, because in my mind I was like, don't all these kids have laptops now, in school? So you don't have to play the most sophisticated Final Fantasy VII remake or whatever, but you can very easily play some of these older games. And then I think about companies getting involved in this and selling licenses to these games. And I guess that goes into my final question, which is, are there any developers and or publishers that are kind of eyes open, ears open in this space right now that are worth noting? Because I think about somewhat of a parallel to this space in accessibility. There are definitely companies and publishers and developers that are way in that space right now, and then ones that aren't, and then ones that have been there from the beginning. So I'm wondering if anyone is kind of privy to this in our space that you would like to call out, because I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I don't know that there's so. I see so much potential, from a even a marketing perspective for companies to try and engage with schools. I mean, Microsoft, which they're a very forward-thinking company. They were very quick they completely revamped Minecraft EDU after they bought it, and right. They've made coding tools within it. They've made a great network. There's a fantastic training program. It's really, really comprehensive. And I mean, what does it get for them? It gets people playing their games, right? It gets people buying their licenses. It spreads the word of their investment in Minecraft. And it kind of shocks me that more people don't jump on that. I mean, there's companies like Google has a education platform. We use it here in Nova Scotia. So it's free Google accounts, free everything to do with Google for students. That gets kids familiar with the Google platform. It makes them native Google users. So the moment one of our students comes into primary, they're given a Google account as a student, and they keep that until they're done with grade 12. And by the time they're done with grade 12, they're inculcated with Google and hopefully become Google users, right? That's a corporate, it's good. It gives them all kinds of skills. But there's an advantage to the company as well. I don't know why, there's not more video game companies that are trying to break into the educational market. I mean, schools have money to buy licenses. There's all kinds of, small developers like that, the Prodigy, the developer, the Prodigy game that I told you about. But no, there's no one like Square or Naughty Dog or anyone, making anything that's just sort of front facing to education or as a way to access students. And it kind of shocks me. It's often teachers finding things that students can manipulate. I've known teachers who have used things like RPG Maker, and I've known teachers who, will bring games in and talk about them, but nothing that's an initiative of a larger company. And to me, if I'm putting on my sort of my hat as a marketing person, that would be a great initiative to take on and a great space to cultivate as a game designer. And I don't know if people are looking at the the things that are happening with Minecraft and learning lessons from that, except maybe Roblox. But it's just, I'm not really aware of anything comprehensive in that space, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. You had touched on Microsoft, which I would feel like would be the obvious winner because of all of the fusion of all of their products, that they might have the means and the mode to get it done. But yeah, because you brought up licenses and subscriptions, and that's where all the money is right now. So you would think, to your point, even though it would be beneficial to children, very much like the Google thing you're discussing, it's really beneficial to them to just have this recurring financial incentive to be in schools. So the company or companies that cracks this, I think, are going to be in for a nice little bump. Not only because I like your very it is sad but true, this observation that they become Google users, they become Xbox gamers, they become whatever. So there's that extra motivation. Well, this was an interesting series of insights, Adam. I appreciate you joining me for Sacred Symbols Plus. Do you want people to be able to find you? I always ask. Do you want to put out your information out there?
No,
or
I mean, I don't really have any. No, I don't need to be found. I'm okay. I'm happy to share kind of some of the work in the educational space, and it's the intersection with games and gaming, and I know that there's teachers in your audience and community, and hopefully
very much,
and certainly would always be happy to share anything with them, and you can always reach out to me on the Discord, I guess. Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, well, you're in Nova Scotia. No one's going to find you up there anyway.
No, we're
not entirely convinced that those places even exist, but here you are. Nonetheless, Adam Hinton, appreciate your time. Appreciate all of you out there for your love, kindness, and support of Sacred Symbols Plus and Sacred Symbols Last Stand, all the rest. We'll see you next time for more. Until then, goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show was conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand's shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.